The afternoon sun cast a harsh glare over Sawbuck Creek as Virginia Vance stood trial before the town's impromptu court, her hands trembling but her spine straight as the judge's gavel crashed down with the force of a death-knell banishment, effective immediately, for the crime of loving Sheriff Steele Blackwood's son. "You have until sundown," Judge Harrison declared, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd gathered in the dusty town square. "After that, anyone seeing Virginia Vance within the borders of this county is authorized to drive her out by whatever means necessary." Virginia's green eyes, normally bright with laughter, were now rimmed with unshed tears as she scanned the faces of people she'd known all her 20 years. Not a single person would meet her gaze, not even the reverend who'd baptized her, nor Mrs. Tate who'd taught her to read. The town she'd called home had turned its back, all because she'd fallen in love with Andrew Blackwood, the sheriff's youngest son. The Blackwood boy led her astray, someone whispered loudly enough for Virginia to hear. But he's gone now and she's paying the price. Virginia lifted her chin. Andrew had indeed fled 3 days prior, promising to return for her once he'd established himself in Colorado territory. But the sheriff, upon discovering his son's intention to marry Virginia, a girl he deemed beneath their station, had unleashed his wrath upon the Vance family. Her father's smithy shop mysteriously burned to the ground the next day, and her brother had been beaten by masked men behind the saloon. When Andrew learned what had happened, he had confronted his father, resulting in a violent altercation that left the young man with little choice but to flee. "I've done nothing wrong," Virginia stated, her voice stronger than she felt. Judge Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Your involvement with Andrew Blackwood has torn this town apart. The sheriff's law is the only thing keeping order in Sawbuck Creek. Your presence is a reminder of defiance we cannot afford." As Virginia was escorted to her family's modest home to collect her belongings, the whispers followed her like shadows. Her mother sobbed quietly as she packed a carpet bag with Virginia's meager possessions, while her father stood stoically by the door, his face a mask of controlled fury. "They can't do this," her younger sister Lily cried. "They just did," Virginia replied, tucking a small photograph of her family into her bag. "But I'll be all right." Her father pressed a small pouch of coins into her hand. "It's not much," he said gruffly, "but it'll get you to your aunt in Santa Fe. Stay there until—" His voice trailed off, the unspoken hope that Andrew would find her hanging in the air between them. The sun was beginning its descent when Virginia mounted the family's oldest mare. Her father had insisted she take the horse, despite knowing it would leave them short-handed. With a final embrace from her family, Virginia rode out of town, feeling the hostile stares of townsfolk burning into her back. She had barely reached the edge of town when a voice called out to her. "Miss Vance." Virginia turned to see Samuel Steele, the new ranch hand from the Triple S, riding toward her. She'd only met the man a handful of times when he'd come into town for supplies. He was tall and weathered, with eyes the color of a storm-dark sky. At 25, he was known as a skilled horseman who kept to himself, and rumors suggested he'd been a cavalry scout during the war. "Mr. Steele," she acknowledged warily, her hand tightening on her reins. "I heard what happened," he said, his voice low as he pulled his horse alongside hers. "Where will you go?" "Santa Fe," she replied cautiously, wondering at his interest. "I have family there." Samuel nodded, glancing back toward town. "That's a hard journey for a woman alone. The trail's dangerous these days." Virginia straightened in her saddle. "I don't have much choice, do I?" "No, I suppose not." He was silent for a moment, then reached into his saddlebag. "Take this, at least." He handed her a small revolver. "Do you know how to use it?" Virginia hesitated before accepting the weapon, Her brother had taught her to shoot years ago, though their father hadn't approved. Yes, good, keep it hidden, but keep it close. His gaze lingered on her face. I'm sorry about what happened, the sheriff. He's not a man who forgives easily. I'm aware, Virginia replied, tucking the revolver into her bag. Why are you helping me? Samuel's expression darkened. Let's just say I understand what it's like to be on the wrong side of a powerful man's anger. He tipped his hat. Godspeed, Miss Vance. Before she could thank him, he had turned his horse and was riding back toward town. Virginia watched him go, wondering about the brief flash of something recognition. Empathy she'd seen in his eyes. Then, squaring her shoulders, she urged her mare forward. Santa Fe lay many miles ahead, and she had no time to waste if she hoped to reach shelter before nightfall. The journey proved more difficult than Virginia had anticipated. Spring rains had washed out sections of the trail, forcing her to take longer routes. By the third day, her supplies were running dangerously low, and the small towns she passed through were suspicious of a young woman traveling alone. It was outside the settlement of Copper Springs that disaster struck. Virginia had stopped to rest her horse near a small creek when three rough-looking men appeared from the tree line. Their intentions were immediately clear from their leering expressions. "Well, well," the largest of them drawled, stepping toward her. "What have we here?" Virginia reached for Samuel's revolver, but the man was faster. He grabbed her arm, twisting it painfully. "That's not very neighborly," he sneered. "Let me go," Virginia demanded, trying to keep the fear from her voice. The man's companions laughed. "She's got spirit," one of them commented, approaching her horse and rummaging through her bags. "Not much worth taking," the third man complained, dumping the contents of her carpet bag onto the ground. "Oh, I don't know," the first man said, his grip tightening on Virginia's arm. "I think we found something worth our time." Virginia fought against his hold, kicking and struggling as panic rose in her chest. Just as the man's free hand grabbed at her dress, a shot rang out, echoing through the clearing. The man holding Virginia jerked backward, releasing her as he clutched his shoulder. "Step away from the lady," came a familiar voice. Virginia whirled around to see Samuel Steele sitting atop his stallion at the edge of the clearing, his rifle aimed steadily at the bandits. "This ain't your business, mister," the wounded man growled, blood seeping between his fingers. "I'm making it my business," Samuel replied, his voice calm but his eyes dangerous. "Now back away." The three men exchanged glances, clearly weighing their chances. After a tense moment, they retreated, mounting their horses and disappearing into the trees with a barrage of curses. Virginia's legs gave out and she sank to the ground, shaking. Samuel dismounted and knelt beside her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her face. Virginia shook her head, trying to regain her composure. "What are you doing here?" Samuel began gathering her scattered belongings. "After I left you, something didn't sit right. I couldn't stop thinking about you making this journey alone." He handed her the small photograph of her family that had fallen from her bag. "I decided to follow, just to be sure you made it safely. You've been following me for 3 days." Virginia asked, uncertain whether to be grateful or alarmed. "At a distance," he admitted. "I didn't want to intrude, but I wanted to make sure you were safe." He paused, looking slightly embarrassed. "I should have made my presence known sooner. I'm sorry." Virginia studied him, trying to understand his motives. "Why would you do that? Leave your job, risk everything to help a stranger?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "Because I know what it's like to be forced from your home for loving someone you shouldn't." His eyes met hers. "And because no one helped me when I needed it." Something in his voice, a raw honesty, made Virginia believe him. She accepted his outstretched hand and let him help her to her feet. "Thank you," she said simply. Samuel nodded, then glanced at the sky. "It'll be dark soon. We should make camp. Tomorrow we can continue to Santa Fe, together if you'll allow it." Virginia hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'd be grateful for the company." That night, as they sat by a small fire, Virginia learned more about the quiet cowboy. Samuel had grown up in Texas, the son of a ranch owner. At 18, he'd fallen in love with a Mexican girl whose family worked on a neighboring property. "Her name was Alina," he said softly, staring into the flames. "Her father had crossed the border years before, looking for work. Alina was born here, but that didn't matter to my father. He forbade the relationship." Virginia wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "What happened?" "I defied him. We continued meeting in secret for nearly a year." Samuel's jaw tightened. "When my father discovered us, he had Alina's family deported, claimed they were illegal, though they weren't. I tried to find them, but—" He trailed off, pain etching lines around his eyes. "My father disowned me. I joined the cavalry after that, fought in the war. When I came back, I drifted, taking work where I could find it." "Is that how you ended up at the Triple S?" Virginia asked. Samuel nodded. "About 6 months ago, it seemed as good a place as any." He looked up at her. "Until I saw what the sheriff did to you." Virginia stared into the fire, remembering Andrew's promises. "Andrew said he'd come back for me once he was established in Colorado. That was the plan before everything fell apart." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "Do you love him?" he asked finally. The question startled Virginia. She'd been so certain of her feelings for Andrew before the banishment. Now, in the face of his absence when she'd needed him most, doubt crept in. "I thought I did," she admitted, "but he left me to face the town alone." "Sometimes people make difficult choices," Samuel said, though his tone suggested he didn't entirely believe his own words. Virginia nodded, suddenly exhausted. "Perhaps. But I'm beginning to wonder if love should be something that gives you strength, not something that leaves you vulnerable." Samuel's gaze lingered on her face. "Get some rest, Miss Vance. We have a long ride tomorrow." Over the next week, as they traveled the remaining distance to Santa Fe, Virginia found herself drawn to Samuel's quiet strength. Unlike the brash, often impulsive Andrew, Samuel was thoughtful and deliberate. He taught her how to set snares for rabbits, how to read the weather from the sky, and how to navigate using the stars. In the evenings, he shared stories of his time as a scout, and Virginia told him about her dreams of one day opening a small dress shop. "You have a good eye for detail," Samuel commented one evening as Virginia mended a tear in his shirt. "You'd make a fine seamstress." Virginia smiled, pleased by the compliment. "My mother taught me. She always said that a woman should have a skill of her own, something no one could take from her." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She is," Virginia agreed, her smile fading. "I miss her, all of them." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "What will you do once we reach Santa Fe?" Virginia tied off her thread and handed the shirt back to him. "Stay with my aunt until I can find work, I suppose. Start over." She looked up at him. "What about you?" he shrugged. "I haven't thought that far ahead. I left the Triple S without notice. Doubt there's a job waiting for me there now." "I'm sorry," Virginia said, guilt washing over her. "You gave up your position because of me." "Don't be sorry," Samuel replied, his voice gentle. "Some things are worth more than a job." Their eyes met across the fire, and Virginia felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear or uncertainty. For the first time since leaving Sawbuck Creek, she found herself glad for the path life had forced her to take. When they finally reached Santa Fe, Virginia's Aunt Mary welcomed her with open arms. A widow who ran a small boarding house, Aunt Mary had always been the family's free spirit, and she showed no judgment when Virginia explained her situation. "Life is too short for regrets, my dear," she said, embracing Virginia. "You'll make a new start here." To Samuel, Aunt Mary was equally welcoming. "Any friend of Virginia's is welcome in my home," she declared, showing him to a modest room at the end of the hall. "Stay as long as you need to get your bearings." Samuel accepted the offer gratefully, though he insisted on working around the boarding house to earn his keep. Virginia watched as he repaired the sagging front porch, replaced broken window panes, and split enough firewood to last through the coming winter. "That young man has his eye on you," Aunt Mary observed one afternoon as they watched Samuel mend the garden fence. Virginia felt her cheeks warm. "We're just friends. He helped me when no one else would." Aunt Mary raised an eyebrow. "I've lived long enough to recognize a man in love, Virginia. And that one," she nodded toward Samuel, "looks at you the way your Uncle George used to look at me." Virginia shook her head, though her heart quickened at the thought. "Even if that were true, I'm in no position to. Andrew might still." "Might still what?" Aunt Mary asked gently. "Come for you. It's been almost a month, dear, not even a letter." Virginia had no answer. She'd written to her family shortly after arriving in Santa Fe, giving them her location in case Andrew came looking for her. But as the weeks passed with no word, the hope she'd clung to began to fade. Samuel, for his part, had found work with a local cattle broker, using his knowledge of horses and livestock to assess the value of herds. The position allowed him to stay in Santa Fe, returning to the boarding house each evening, where he and Virginia often sat on the porch, talking late into the night. It was during one such evening, nearly 2 months after their arrival, that Virginia finally admitted to herself that her feelings for Samuel had grown beyond friendship. "I received a letter from my father today," she told him as they watched lightning flicker in the distant mountains. Samuel turned to her, concern in his eyes. "Is everything all right at home?" Virginia nodded. "They're managing. The community has been helping them rebuild." She hesitated. He also mentioned that Andrew returned to Sawbuck Creek briefly. Samuel's expression remained carefully neutral. "Oh. Yes. Apparently he's established himself with a mining company in Denver. He asked about me." "I see." Samuel's voice was steady, but his hands tightened on the arms of his chair. "Will you be joining him in Denver then?" Virginia looked out at the darkening sky. "No. My father wrote that Andrew came with a young woman. They're engaged to be married." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry, Virginia." She turned to him, surprised to find that the news caused her more relief than pain. "Don't be. I think perhaps it worked out as it should have." "What do you mean?" Virginia gathered her courage. "If I hadn't been banished, if Andrew had kept his promise to return for me, I would never have met you." She looked directly into his eyes. "And I'm beginning to think that would have been the greater loss." Samuel's expression softened, hope dawning in his eyes. "Virginia." But before he could continue, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. 3 riders came to a stop in front of the boarding house, their faces obscured by the gathering darkness. "We're looking for Virginia Vance," the lead rider announced, his voice carrying a familiar authority that made Virginia's blood run cold. Samuel was on his feet instantly, his hand moving toward the revolver at his hip. "Who's asking?" The rider dismounted, stepping into the pool of lamplight spilling from the porch. "Sheriff Blackwood of Sawbuck Creek, and you do well to keep your hand away from that gun, boy." Virginia rose shakily to her feet. "Sheriff Blackwood, what brings you all the way to Santa Fe?" The older man's eyes were hard as he surveyed her. "Justice, Miss Vance. Your father has been arrested for assaulting my son." "What?" Virginia gasped. "That's impossible. My father would never." Andrew returned home with his fiancée, the sheriff continued coldly. Your father confronted him in the street, accused him of dishonoring you. When Andrew defended himself, your father attacked him. He's currently in my jail awaiting trial." Virginia's mind raced. Her gentle, law-abiding father in jail, it made no sense. "I don't believe you." Sheriff Blackwood produced a folded paper from his coat. "Judge Harrison has ordered your return to Sawbuck Creek to testify. You can come willingly, or—" His hand moved toward his own weapon, making the implied threat clear. Samuel stepped in front of Virginia. "She's not going anywhere with you." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "And who might you be?" "Samuel Steele. I worked at the Triple S until recently." Recognition flashed in the sheriff's eyes. "Ah, yes, the drifter who disappeared around the same time as Miss Vance. Interesting coincidence." "No coincidence," Samuel stated firmly. "I left to ensure her safety after your unjust banishment." The sheriff's companions dismounted now, hands hovering near their weapons. The tension in the air was palpable. "Step aside, Steele," the sheriff ordered. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me very much," Samuel replied, not moving. Virginia placed a hand on Samuel's arm. "Please, Samuel, I don't want anyone hurt because of me." The front door opened, and Aunt Mary appeared, a shotgun in her hands. "What's the meaning of this commotion on my property?" she demanded. Sheriff Blackwood eyed the weapon warily. "Madam, I'm here on official business." "It's nearly 9 o'clock at night," Aunt Mary replied sharply. "Official business can wait until morning. Now, unless you have a warrant for my niece's arrest, I suggest you find lodging elsewhere for the night." The sheriff's jaw tightened, but he made no move toward the porch. "Very well. We'll return at first light, but make no mistake, Miss Vance, you will be returning to Sawbuck Creek." As the men retreated, Virginia turned to Samuel, her eyes wide with fear. "My father would never attack anyone." "This is a trick, it has to be." Samuel nodded grimly. "I agree, but why? What does the sheriff gain by bringing you back now?" Aunt Mary lowered her shotgun. "Whatever the reason, it can't be good. You two need to leave tonight." Virginia stared at her aunt. "Leave? But where would we go?" "Anywhere but back to Sawbuck Creek," Aunt Mary replied firmly. "I don't trust that man as far as I could throw him." Samuel's expression was thoughtful. "I have a friend who owns a ranch near Tucson. We could head there, at least temporarily." Virginia shook her head. "I can't just run." "If my father truly is in jail, think, Virginia," Samuel urged. "If the sheriff wanted a witness for a legitimate case, he'd have sent a deputy with proper papers, not come himself in the middle of the night." "Samuel's right," Aunt Mary added. "Something's not right about this. You need to get away until we can figure out what's really happening." Virginia looked between them, torn between fear for her father and mistrust of the sheriff. Finally, she nodded. "All right, we'll leave tonight." Within an hour, they had packed essential supplies and saddled their horses. Aunt Mary pressed a small pouch of money into Virginia's hands. "Your uncle's savings," she explained. "He'd want you to have it. Now go and don't look back." With tearful goodbyes, Virginia and Samuel rode out the back way, taking a seldom-used trail that led west, away from the main roads where the sheriff might look for them. They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. As dawn broke, they found themselves in a small canyon, sheltered from view by towering rock walls. "We should be safe here for a few hours," Samuel said, helping Virginia dismount. "Get some rest. I'll keep watch." Virginia nodded, too exhausted to argue. She settled against a boulder, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders against the morning chill. "Samuel," she said as he turned to go, "thank you for everything." He smiled softly. "There's no need for thanks between us, Virginia." As Virginia drifted into an uneasy sleep, her mind whirled with questions. Why would the sheriff come all this way himself? What was the true reason he wanted her back in Sawbuck Creek? And most troubling of all was her father truly in danger because of her. She woke several hours later to find Samuel sitting nearby, cleaning his revolver. "Any sign of pursuit?" she asked, stretching stiff muscles. Samuel shook his head. "Nothing. But that doesn't mean they're not looking." Virginia accepted the canteen he offered her. "I've been thinking. We need to know what's really happening in Sawbuck Creek." "I agree," Samuel said, "but returning would be too dangerous." "Not for me," Virginia argued. "For you, I need to know if my father is truly in jail and why the sheriff is so determined to find me." Samuel's expression darkened. "Out of the question. I'm not letting you go back there alone." "But no, Virginia," his voice was firm. "We'll find another way. Perhaps we could send a telegram to your mother from the next town, ask for more information." Virginia reluctantly agreed, though she wasn't convinced it would be enough. As they continued their journey west, stopping in small settlements only long enough to gather supplies and information, a new worry began to gnaw at her. "What if the sheriff follows us to your friend's ranch?" she asked one evening as they camped beneath a spectacular display of stars. "We'd be putting him in danger too." Samuel considered this. "You're right. Maybe Tucson isn't the best idea after all." He stared into the fire. "We could keep moving, head to California perhaps." Virginia watched the flames dance. "Is that what you want, to keep running?" Samuel looked up at her, his eyes serious. "What I want is to keep you safe, and to understand why the sheriff is so determined to find you." "It doesn't make sense," Virginia agreed. "The banishment was his idea." "Why would he want me back now?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "Unless the banishment wasn't about you and Andrew at all. What if there was another reason he wanted you gone from Sawbuck Creek?" Virginia frowned. "Like what?" "I don't know, but something about this feels wrong." Samuel poked at the fire. "Did anything unusual happen in town before you were banished? Anything that might have caught the sheriff's attention?" Virginia thought back, sifting through memories. "Not that I can recall, although—" She paused, remembering something. "A few days before the banishment, I was helping Mrs. Tate organize the town records for the spring cleaning. We found some old deeds in the courthouse basement." "What kind of deeds?" "Land grants, mostly, dating back to when the territory was still part of Mexico. Mrs. Tate thought they might be valuable historical documents." Samuel sat up straighter. "Did you look at them closely?" Virginia nodded slowly. "Yes, some of them were for land around Sawbuck Creek. One in particular caught my attention because it had my grandfather's name on it. I mentioned it to Mrs. Tate, but she said it was probably just a coincidence." Samuel's expression grew intent. "Virginia, what if it wasn't a coincidence? What if your family had a legitimate claim to land that someone powerful now controls?" The implication hung in the air between them. "You think the sheriff?" "It would explain why he was so determined to get you out of town, why he came himself to find you, and possibly even why your father is in jail." Samuel's eyes were alight with realization. "If those deeds prove that land was wrongfully taken, then the sheriff would have a powerful motive to make sure they're never examined closely," Virginia finished, her heart racing. "And my banishment ensured I couldn't pursue the matter." They stared at each other across the fire, the pieces falling into place. "We need to get back to Sawbuck Creek," Virginia said decisively. "Not to surrender to the sheriff, but to find those deeds." Samuel nodded slowly. "It's dangerous, but I think you're right. If we can prove the sheriff's corruption, we could not only free your father but potentially restore your family's rightful property." Virginia felt a surge of determination. "We'll need to be careful. The sheriff will be watching for us." "We'll approach from the west, avoid the main roads," Samuel said, already planning. "And we'll need help from someone in town, someone we can trust." Virginia thought for a moment. "Mrs. Tate. She knows about the deeds and she always treated me kindly, even after the banishment." "Good," Samuel agreed. "We'll send word to her before we arrive." As they refined their plan, Virginia felt something she hadn't experienced since the day of her banishment: hope. Not just for justice, but for a future that suddenly seemed possible again. "Samuel," she said softly as they prepared to sleep, "if we succeed, what happens afterward?" He looked at her across the dying embers of the fire. "What do you want to happen?" Virginia took a deep breath. "I want a life that isn't defined by running or fear. I want—" She hesitated, then met his gaze steadily. "I want a future with you, if that's what you want too." Samuel moved to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. "Virginia, from the moment I followed you out of Sawbuck Creek, I think I knew we were headed toward something more than friendship. These past months, getting to know you, seeing your strength and your heart, I've fallen in love with you." Virginia's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too, Samuel. I think I have for some time now." He touched her cheek gently. "When this is over, when your family is safe and the truth is known, I'd like to build a life with you, wherever that might be." Virginia leaned into his touch. "I'd like that too, very much." As Samuel's lips met hers in a tender kiss, Virginia felt the last pieces of her old life: her girlish infatuation with Andrew, her fear of the future, her sense of injustice begin to fall away. In their place was something stronger. Love born not of youthful fantasy but of shared hardship, mutual respect, and genuine understanding. Their journey back to Sawbuck Creek would be dangerous, but for the first time since her banishment, Virginia was not afraid. With Samuel beside her, she was ready to face whatever came next, not just for justice or for her family, but for the future they hoped to build together. The return to Sawbuck Creek took nearly 2 weeks of careful travel. They avoided main roads, slept during daylight hours, and moved under the cover of darkness. In a small trading post a day's ride from town, they sent a carefully worded message to Mrs. Tate, requesting her help and arranging a meeting. When they finally reached the outskirts of Sawbuck Creek, Virginia felt a strange mixture of emotions: fear, determination, and an unexpected sense of homecoming. They made camp in a secluded ravine, waiting for nightfall when Mrs. Tate had agreed to meet them. The schoolteacher arrived as promised, bringing news that confirmed their suspicions. Virginia's father was indeed in jail, charged with assault, but the real reason was his persistent questions about the old land deeds his daughter had mentioned in a letter. "The sheriff has been nervous ever since you left," Mrs. Tate explained, her voice hushed despite their isolated location. "When your father received your letter and learned you were safe, he began asking questions about your grandfather's land that now forms the most productive part of the sheriff's ranch." "And the deeds?" Samuel asked. Mrs. Tate smiled slightly. "Hidden. I removed them from the courthouse the day after Virginia's banishment. Something about the sheriff's eagerness to be rid of her made me suspicious." Virginia felt a surge of gratitude. "Mrs. Tate, you've taken a terrible risk." The older woman squeezed her hand. "Some risks are worth taking, my dear. Now, here's what we must do." The plan they formed was daring but necessary. While Samuel created a distraction at the opposite end of town, Mrs. Tate would escort Virginia disguised as her elderly aunt to the jail to see her father. Meanwhile, a trusted lawyer from the neighboring town, already summoned by Mrs. Tate, would be waiting at the courthouse with the deeds, ready to file a formal challenge to the sheriff's land claims. As dawn approached and Mrs. Tate prepared to leave, she turned to Virginia with a knowing smile. "I see you found what you were truly looking for," she said, glancing between Virginia and Samuel. Virginia blushed but didn't deny it. "Yes, though it wasn't what I expected." "The best things rarely are," Mrs. Tate replied wisely. "Be ready tomorrow at dusk and be careful, both of you." The next evening, the plan was set in motion. Samuel rode boldly into the far end of town, firing shots into the air and creating enough commotion to draw the sheriff and his deputies away from the jail. Virginia, her face obscured by a heavy veil and walking with an exaggerated stoop, made her way with Mrs. Tate to see her father. The reunion, though brief, was emotional. Mr. Vance was thin but unbroken, his spirits lifted by the knowledge that his daughter was not only safe but had returned to help him. "I always knew you had your mother's courage," he said, embracing her through the cell bars. "But be careful, Virginia. The sheriff is desperate. He knows the deeds could ruin him." "We have help," Virginia assured him. "By this time tomorrow you'll be free and the truth will be known." As they left the jail, Virginia caught sight of Samuel at the far end of the street, still leading the sheriff and his men on a chase. Her heart clenched with worry for him, but she forced herself to follow Mrs. Tate toward the courthouse. Inside, the lawyer was waiting as promised. The deeds were examined, their authenticity confirmed, and the legal challenge officially filed. It would force a public hearing within days, a hearing where the sheriff would have to answer for the illegal acquisition of Vance family land. "Now we wait," the lawyer said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "These documents are indisputable. Justice will be served." Virginia nodded, though her thoughts were with Samuel. Had he escaped the sheriff's pursuit? Was he safe? Her answer came later that night when he appeared at their hiding place, a small cut above his eye but otherwise unharmed. "It worked," he told her, accepting the cloth she pressed to his wound. The sheriff was furious, but he never suspected the real plan. Virginia smiled, relief washing through her. "The deeds have been filed. There will be a hearing within days." Samuel pulled her close. "Then it's almost over." The hearing, when it came, was more dramatic than anyone anticipated. The entire town gathered at the courthouse, murmurs of speculation rippling through the crowd. Virginia and Samuel sat near the back, ready to flee if necessary, though Mrs. Tate had assured them that several influential citizens now supported their cause. Judge Harrison, to his credit, conducted the proceedings with impartiality. The evidence was presented: the original land grants, records of transactions that had never occurred, witness statements from elderly residents who remembered the true ownership of the disputed property. Sheriff Blackwood's denials grew increasingly desperate as the truth emerged. When finally confronted with irrefutable evidence of his fraud, he made a last, fatal mistake. He drew his weapon in the courtroom. Before he could fire, several men, including Samuel, tackled him to the ground. The gun discharged harmlessly into the ceiling, and the sheriff was disarmed and restrained. In the aftermath, justice came swiftly. Virginia's father was released from jail. The sheriff was arrested on multiple charges of fraud, misuse of authority, and attempted murder. And the Vance family's rightful ownership of substantial lands surrounding Sawbuck Creek was legally recognized. "What will you do now?" Mrs. Tate asked Virginia a week later, as they sat on the porch of the Vance family home. Virginia looked across the street where Samuel was deep in conversation with her father. "We've been talking about that. The land needs managing, and Samuel has experience with cattle ranching." Mrs. Tate smiled knowingly. "So you'll stay in Sawbuck Creek then?" "For now," Virginia nodded. "This is home, after all, and now it feels right to be here again." Later that evening, as the sun set over land that now legally belonged to her family, Virginia walked with Samuel along the creek that gave the town its name. "Your father gave me his blessing today," Samuel said, taking her hand. "If you'll have me, that is." Virginia stopped, turning to face him. "Are you proposing Samuel Steele?" He smiled, drawing her close. "I am. I love you, Virginia. These past months have shown me what truly matters in life, and for me, that's you." Virginia's heart swelled with joy. "Then yes, I'll marry you. Not because you saved me or helped restore my family's land, but because loving you has taught me what real love should be: supportive, respectful, and brave." As Samuel's lips met hers, the last rays of sunlight gilded the landscape around them, land that would now support not just the renewed Vance family fortune, but the future they would build together. 1 year later, Virginia stood on the porch of the ranch house Samuel had built for them on her family's land. Their wedding, a joyous affair attended by the entire town, had taken place just 6 months after the sheriff's downfall. Now, as she watched Samuel ride in from checking the herd, her hand rested on the slight swell of her belly where their first child grew. Life had taken an unexpected turn the day she was banished from Sawbuck Creek for loving the wrong man. But as Samuel dismounted and strode toward her, his face lighting up at the sight of her, Virginia knew with absolute certainty that she had found the right one, the man who had ridden back for her when she needed him most, and who would stand beside her for all the days to come.